4.2 deals with the standard form of a quadratic function. So yesterday and the day before we learned the vertex form, and today we're going to do the standard form. So the standard form of a parabola is f of x is equal to a times x squared plus b times x plus c. So the a is what's being multiplied to the x squared, the b is what's being multiplied to the x, and the c is just the constant at the end. And what is this the graph of?
Parabola.
A parabola. So, just like before, when a is positive, the graph is going to open upwards. And when a is negative, it's going to open down. Yes.
So when it's greater than it's just up and less than down.
Yeah.
When it's negative?
When it's negative, it goes down. So now we have our axis of symmetry is x is equal to negative b over 2a. So this equation right here is going to tell us what our axis of symmetry is. So we're going to use b from here and a from here. So negative b over 2a. And then we're going to take what we get for our axis of symmetry, and that's going to be our x variable in our vertex. And we're going to plug what we get into the x's up here. And that's going to be our y variable in our vertex. So we're going to get a value for x, plug it into our original equation, and that's going to be our y for our vertex. So examples. So what is the graph of y is equal to x squared plus 2x plus 3? What is our a here?
The 3. No, the x.
So a is what's being multiplied to x squared. Do we have anything that's being multiplied to? 1. What is our b? 2. And what's our c? 3. So first let's find our axis of symmetry. What do we say our equation for axis of symmetry is? That's when it's in vertex form. But what about when it's in standard form? Negative b over 2a. So now we just need to plug in our b and plug in our a. So we have x is equal to negative, what's our b?
2.
Over 2 times, what's our a? 1. So we have negative 2 over 2. What does that simplify to? Negative 1. So our axis of symmetry is x is equal to negative 1. Next, we need to find our vertex. What's our first number in our vertex? The x. Negative 1. It's the same thing as our axis of symmetry. And then what's our second number going to be? What do we need to do to find that? Plug it in. So we plug in negative 1 into our equation up here. So we have y is equal to negative 1 squared plus 2 times negative 1 plus 3. So we have positive 1 plus what's 2 times negative 1? 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, so we have a minus 2. And then plus 3. So what's 1 minus 2? Negative 1. And what's negative 1 plus 3? 2. So our vertex is going to be negative 1, comma 2. So now we can graph that. So we're going to go to the left 1 and up 2, and our vertex is going to be right there, and our axis of symmetry is going to be a line right through it. What do we do next to graph our parabola? We got to find points. Yes. So we need to plug in values for x and get y's. So what can we plug in for x? 1. So now we have y is equal to 1 squared plus 2 times 1 plus 3. So what's 1 squared? And what's 2 times 1? And then we have a plus 3. So we have 1 plus 2 plus 3, which is 6. So when we plug in 1, we get 6. So our first point is going to be 1, 6. So we're going to go to our graph. We're going to go to the right 1 and up 6. So now this point here is 2 spaces away from our axis of symmetry, so we need the same point that's 2 spaces away on the other side. So we're going to put a point here.
So basically, the axis of symmetry is the new y-axis. Because you're doing the same thing on both sides.
You're doing the same thing on both sides, but when we get this point here, you need to use like the x and y axis. So like we're going to the right 1 from 0, not from our axis of symmetry. But then once we graph that point, then we can say since we're up 6 and over 2 on the right, we need to be up 6 and over 2 on the left. What's another point we can plug in? 0. So now we have y is equal to 0 squared plus 2 times 0 plus 3. So what's 0 squared? 0 plus what's 2 times 0? Plus 3. So it's 0 plus 0 plus 3. 3. So when we plug in 0, we get 3. So our other point is going to be 0, 3. So we are going to go, we're going to stay on 0 and go up 3. And we're 1 space away from the axis of symmetry on the right, so we need to be 1 space away from the axis of symmetry on the left. So our point's going to be right there. And now we have enough points to graph here. Any questions on this?
I feel like when we find the points, we just need to find 2.
Mm-hmm. Just 2 on each side. So really you're only plugging in 2 numbers, but it's going to give you 4 points. All right, next one. What is the graph of y is equal to negative 2x squared plus 2x minus 5? So what's our A?
-2.
What's our B?
2.
And what's our C?
-5.
So now let's find our axis of symmetry. What's the equation for axis of symmetry? Negative b over 2a. So now we just plug in our b and our a. So we have negative 2, bless you, over 2 times negative 2. So we have negative 2 over negative 4. What does this simplify to? 1/2. Perfect. Because a negative divided by a negative is positive. 1/2. So now we have to find our vertex.
That's the axis.
Yes, this is the axis of symmetry, so we can graph that. So it's going to be at 1/2.
You say your vertex is always going to be the same thing as your axis of symmetry.
It has the same x. So the first number is going to be the same. So what's our first number in our vertex? 1/2. What do we do to find our second number in our vertex? Plug it in. So we need y is equal to -2 times 1/2 squared plus 2 times 1/2 minus 5. What is 1/2 squared? What's 1/2 times 1/2? 1/4. So now we have 1/4 times -2. -1/2. So we get -2 over 4, which simplifies to -1/2. So our first number here is going to be -1/2. Now we have 2 times 1/2. 1. And then minus 5. So what do we do when we add fractions? We need to find the same denominator. So what can we change 1 into? So how do we get 1 to have the same denominator as 1/2? We times it by 2 over 2. So 1 becomes 2 over 2. And then we have minus 5. So how do we change 5 to have the same denominator? We do the same thing. We times it by 2 over 2. So we're going to get 10 over 2. So now we can add up all the numerators. So we have -1 plus 2 minus 10. What does that give us? What's -1 plus 2? 1. And then what's 1 minus 10? -9. So we get a -9 on top, and we just keep our 2 on the bottom. 1 minus 10. Positive 1 minus 10. -9. Okay, so our y, we get -9 over 2. And now we can graph our vertex. So we're going to go to the right 1/2 and down 9 over 2, which is about 4.5. So our point's going to be down here. What can we do next? We have our vertex and our axis of symmetry, but we need a graph. We need a parabola. So we plug in numbers. So what can we plug in for x? 1. So I'm going to do it at the top over here. So we have y is equal to -2 times 1 squared plus 2x minus 5. So what's 1 squared?
1.
And what's 1 times -2?
-2.
So we get a -2 plus, what's 2 times 1?
2.
And then a minus 5. So we have -2 plus 2, 0 minus 5, -5. So when we plug 1 in, we get -5. So our first point is going to be 1, -5. So we can go to the right 1 and down 5. So now this point is 1/2 1/2 space away from our graph here, so it needs to be 1/2 space away from the other side. So our other point is going to be 0, 5. So it's going to be right on the y-axis and down 5. So what else can we plug in for x? Well, we just found that we have 0.05, so we know 0, -5. So we know when we plug in 0, we're going to get -5. So we can plug in 2. So we have y is equal to -2 times 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 5. So we have y is equal to, what's 2 squared? 4. And what's 4 times -2? -8. What's 2 times 2? So plus 4, and then minus 5. So we have -8 plus 4. -4. What's -4 minus 5? -9. So when we plug in 2 for x, we get -9 for y. So our next point is going to be 2, -9. So we're going to go to our graph. We're going to go to the right 2 and then down 9. 2, 3, 4. So our other point is going to be right there. And then we need to be, since we're 1.5 spaces away from the right here, we need to be 1.5 space here. So we're going to go down 1 and then put this on. We need to go left 1 from our y-axis and then go down 9. So our graph is going to look like this. Yes. Yes. Any questions on this? All right, let's do another. So now we need to identify the vertex, axis of symmetry, and the maximum or minimum value of the parabola. So how do we find our vertex? Where on the graph is the vertex located? It's the very bottom. It's this point right here. So can we just look at this picture and tell what our vertex is? Yeah, so what's our vertex? 0, -4. Now we can find our axis of symmetry. And it is x is equal to 0. It's this line right here. Now, do we have an important maximum value or an important minimum value here? Minimum. Not because it's negative, but because this graph goes up to infinity. So we don't really care about the values up here, but what's important is our minimum value down here. So what is our minimum? -4. And that's it. That's all it asks for. I don't think so. But it's important to be able to identify what's what.
Is that a quiz question?
No. Okay, so identify the vertex, the axis of symmetry, the maximum or min, and the range of each parabola. So how can we find our axis of symmetry? What's our A?
2.
And what's our B?
5.
0. Because we don't have, remember, our A is in front of the x squared. We don't have an x, so there's no number in front of our x. So our B is 0. And what's our C? 5.
Why would you use 0? Is this any problem?
No, because the formula isn't it 2x just like ax is second plus bx plus c.
So
why is B 0? Why is B 5?
because so B is the number that's in front of x, just x. So since we have no x here, it's like saying 0 is in front of x. And c is the constant that's at the end that has no x's next to it. So since 5 has nothing next to it, that's our c. So what's our formula for axis of symmetry?
Negative b
over 2a.
So what's our b? So we have negative 0 over, what's 2 times 2? What do we get when we have a 0 on the numerator? What's 0 divided by 4? 0. So our axis of symmetry is x is equal to 0. Now let's find our vertex. What's the first number in our vertex going to be? 0. And then how do we find our second number? Plug it in. So we plug in 0 into x to find our y. So we have 2 times 0 squared plus 5. What's 0 squared? And what's 0 times 2?
0.
And what's 0 plus 5? 5. So when we plug in 0, we get 5. So if we graphed this, our vertex is going to be at 0, and then we're going to go up 5. And our axis of symmetry is going to be right through it. Is our graph going to open up or open down? It's opening up. Brett, why does it open up? Because A is positive. So are we going to have a max value or a min value?
It's min, come on! That's your quiz.
When it goes up, we have a minimum value.
What about when it goes down?
When it goes down, we have a maximum.
Oh.
Look, what's important here? All these numbers that go to infinity or the lowest number. Okay, so what's important? All these values up here or the lowest value here?
The lowest value.
The lowest value. So what is our min going to be? 5. Remember, the minimum has to do with the y value. And then what's our range? If we start at the bottom and go to the top, where does our graph start?
5.
At 5. And where does it go? Infinity. Same thing.
So up is minimum, max is down.
Yes.
So it's opposite. You would think up would be maximum, but
Yeah. So our range is 5 to infinity. Any questions on this? All right, we have one more example like this, and then we're done. Yay. So what's our A here?
1.
Negative 1. What's our B?
0.
Negative 1.
Negative 1.
Why is it negative 1?
Because look, we haven't...
X is like, it's always equal to 1.
Yes,
And this
x is
negative-
always equal to 1 if there is a negative, it has to
In
be
between it, and count that negative?
Yes.
Yes.
Dude, that's confusing.
Whoa.
Okay, so our B is negative 1. Because in front of the X, we see this as a 1. So we have a negative 1 right in front of it. Do we have a C value?
No.
No, so what's our C?
0.
C is 0.
Now it's 0.
Oh, because there's an X. I forgot you told me
Yep,
that.
because the X.
Makes sense now. I got it.
So now we can find our axis of symmetry. What's our equation for axis of symmetry?
Negative b over 2a.
Negative B over 2a. So what's our B? So we have a negative 1 on top. And then what do we have on bottom? 2 times negative 1. So what does the top become? 1. And what is the bottom? Negative 2. So we have a negative 1/2. And that's our axis of symmetry. So we have our vertex now. What's our first point in our vertex? Negative 1/2. And how do we find our second point? We got to plug it in. So we have y is equal to negative times negative 1.5 squared minus negative 1.5. So what is negative 1.5 squared? 1/4. And then we have a negative out in front of it, so we need that negative there too. And then what is minus a negative become? A positive. So we have 1/4 plus 1/2. Yes. How can we add these fractions together?
You gotta make them both with the same denominator.
We need to make them the same denominator. So what can we do to our second number?
You gotta multiply it by 2.
We multiply it by 2 over 2. So this becomes a negative 1/4 plus 2 over 4. So then what does it become? 1/4. When we have minus 1/4 plus 2/4, it becomes 1/4. So what's our y value here? 1/4. Now if we have our graph, we're going to go to the left 1/2 and up 1/4. So it's going to be somewhere there. Is our graph going to open up or open down? Why does it open down? Because the a is negative, so it's going to open down. So do we have an important max value or important min? Max. And what's our important max value here? What's our y value here? 1/4. So remember, our max or min is going to be our y value. So it's 1/4. And then what's our range? If we start at the bottom, this graph goes to what? Infinity or?
Beyond.
It goes down, so where's it going? Negative infinity. So it starts at negative infinity, and where does it end?
1/4.
1/4.